Hey, how's it going guys? My name is Dom and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be showing you how to build a search bar using web components. Now, this here is the design which I used in my previous video on building a stylish search bar, but we're going to take that design and put it inside a web component instead. This way you can use it a lot more easily and as many times as you need. I'm also demonstrating right here that you can in fact change the placeholder for different search bars if you need to, and it's going to look something like this. It's a pretty standard search bar. And you can of course listen for input events and change events. That stuff is going to be up to you guys. We're going to get to that towards the end of the video. But for now, let's look at how we can create these search bars using web components. So going inside this tab, we're going to be starting from scratch to create what I just showed you. And also keep in mind that in order to get the search icon on the left side, we need to use an icon library. So we're going to be using Ionicons for this video. It's going to be linked down below. And the first thing we need to do is actually import this library into the HTML. So once you click on this link, you should be able to go to the usage section at the top here and just simply copy these two script tags. So copy that right there and paste it at the end of your body. So I'm going to do that right now. And that's all we need to do in order to get those icons on the page so we can now begin to use them. In terms of the file structure for this project, we're going to be also creating a new index.js file. And I'm also going to be creating a new directory called components, and we're going to be storing all of the code for the search bar inside there. Now, in terms of importing this index.js file, we can do so by going up in the head of our HTML, and we can just say scripts and use a type of module right here because we're going to be using the import export syntax. And we can just say index.js just like that, okay? So we'll save this and we have our overall file structure set up. Now, when it comes to the search bar, we're going to be using a JavaScript class to hold all of the code for a search bar component. So let's go inside the components directory here, make a new file called searchbar.js in Pascal case. So capital S, capital B. Not required, but it does look a little bit nicer. Now within here, we can begin to define the class to represent the search bar component. So we can say here, export class search bar, okay, extends HTML element. Now, two things to mention here. Number one, we use export because we then want to import this in the index.js file. More on that shortly. And secondly, we use extend HTML element because this here is a requirement to build a custom element. Okay. Inside the constructor for the search bar, much like extending from HTML element, we also need to call the super. That is a requirement to get this to work as we want it to. And once we've done that, we can just say this.attach shadow, okay? And we can set a mode of open just like this. And what this is doing is essentially giving us the ability to have our own sheltered DOM within the component itself. So our own elements, our own CSS styles, everything's going to be protected and contained within the actual web component. So that is what that's doing. And speaking of that, we can also specify a connected callback. And this method here is going to run once our component is rendered on the DOM. I might actually just stop here and show you the example again because I forgot to mention, or I forgot to actually show you the usage. So if I go into the elements section, we can see here the usage of these search bars is simply just like this. You say search dash bar, you can provide an ID if you need to, and your placeholder as in data dash placeholder just like that. Okay, fantastic. So going back to the code, when I said connected callback, that just means, look, once the actual element is on the page, that is when this method's going to be called, and you can have your setup inside here. Now I'm going to stop very shortly and show you some progress in the browser, but I just want to quickly say this.shadowroot.inner.html and just say something like search bar. So I'm going to stop right here, but basically what's happening is I'm then saying, look, for the HTML of this component, we're going to say search bar. So shadow root is, like I said, the own sheltered DOM, and we're just injecting that text right there. So if I go back inside the index.js now, let's get this working so I can show you what it looks like on the page. We can just say custom elements.define. Then we're going to say search dash bar. So you provide here what your custom tag should be named. Then I'm going to say search bar just like this, and VS Code is going to automatically import the search bar. I want to make sure to include the .js extension at the end there, okay, as well. I'm going to save this, then go back in the browser, and we get nothing on the screen. Of course, it didn't work correctly, and I forgot to then use that search bar in the HTML. So let's go back in the HTML, and let's just say open bracket search dash bar, and leave it like that. Save this back in the browser, and we get the search bar right there. And when I say search bar, I mean the text search bar, right? Now, let me just quickly go into the elements section and inspect that element. And we can see here, if we expand it, we get the shadow root. And like I said, this here is all HTML, all elements which just belong to the component itself. Any CSS provided inside here will only apply to this document, this shadow DOM, right? Fantastic. Going back inside VS Code now, we can move on to getting this to actually look like a search bar. So for the inner HTML, we're going to just get rid of this search bar right here. Going to hop down, and we're going to begin to use the Ionicons library. We want to have that search icon on the left side. And now in order to use a multi-line string here, I need to replace these double quotes with the backticks near the one on your keyboard, okay, the backtick character. Now we can hop down and we can also inject expressions and things like that. So for now, we're just going to go actually back on the Ionicons web page here and have a look at how we can use it. So going back to the icons section, we can do a search now, okay, for the term search, okay, and we get this icon right here. You may also choose a filled or a sharp design of the icon. I'll use filled. On the bottom, you have the usage for that icon, as we can see right there. I'll click this, it's going to copy that code, and it just so happens that Ionicons also uses web components for their icons. Now, it's not a requirement that we use web components with web components, but it's just a coincidence, and I can paste this usage inside there. I'll save this, go back in the browser, and we get the icon displayed right there. Okay, fantastic. Now we can also provide an input field because, of course, a custom search bar requires an input field. I'm just going to say input with a class of input and a type of search, okay, and some placeholder text. I'm just going to say placeholder is equal to search, just like this. So this now is the input field for the user to, of course, input their text in. Save this back in the browser, and we get this right here. So at this point, essentially our search bar component consists of two things, an icon and an input field. And that's all we actually need. But now let's use CSS to make this here look like this here. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we can use an external CSS style sheet. Let's create a new file right here inside components called searchbar.css this time around. And we can now provide some styles. Okay, we're going to be beginning with what's called the host element in terms of the styling. Now, the host element, when it comes to these custom elements here, essentially refers to the container for the web component. So in other words, this element right here. At the moment, if I go back in the browser here, just to explain this, right, this search bar is one element, okay? This is the host. Then you have two more, the icon and the input field. So there's three elements in this example. So to target the container, the actual search bar, you can use something called :host. Now, without web components, you may wish to define a div with a class of search or a class of search container, and that will be the equivalent of using :host in custom elements, right? So in this :host, we're going to provide a few properties. Let's say a width of max content. This way, the width of the container is just going to follow the content within the container. So, in other words, the icon and the actual input field. This here gives you more finer control over what the width's going to be. And we're going to say here a display also of flex and align items of center. This is going to allow us to vertically align the icon and the input field, okay? We're going to also give this a gap of 14 pixels, so a gap of 14 pixels between the search icon and the input field, as well as some padding. We'll say padding also 14 pixels, and a border dash radius here of 28 pixels, and a background of F6, F6, F6. I'll save this, go back in the browser, and we get nothing. We need to now import this CSS style sheet. Now we can do this inside the web component itself. Let's create a new link tag with the rel of style sheet, just like you would inside your HTML. We can say href going to /components /search bar.css. Save this back in the browser, and we get the styles applied. The reason why this works is because this link here is, this is using the root URL of the website. So, in other words, if I, open this one up, we get here /components search bar.css. Just make sure that your route is correct or URL is correct for the search bar. Okay, fantastic. So we have the CSS imported. If I inspect again, we can see that by saying :host in the CSS, we're targeting the search bar, just to reiterate, okay? Fantastic. So now we can move on to styling the input field itself. Now we can see I actually gave this a class of input, so we can now access that from the CSS. I did forget to also give the icon a class, so I'm going to say here class of icon, okay? So back inside the CSS now, let's say input, and we're going to give this a font family of Lexend. That's my custom, well, it's not my font, but it's the font I use for dcode. And you can, of course, use whatever you like here for this one. Give this a font size of 16 pixels, a color of a dark gray, an outline of none, a border of none, and a transparent background. And lastly, the width, up to you guys. I'm going to say 300 pixels. Save this back in the browser, and we get this right here. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? Well, that's a great question. So that's being imported. Let me just save and refresh, and there we go. Okay, so maybe the live server extension didn't pick up that change for some reason, but on a refresh it works, and we can see, of course, those styles have been applied there for the input field itself. Fantastic. We can now move on to styling up the icon on the left side. So give it a bit of a darker color, as well as the placeholder text. So going back inside here now, in the CSS, we're going to say input : placeholder. That right there is going to target the placeholder text if you haven't provided input, okay? Also targeting the icon itself, a class of icon there. Once again, you must have a class of icon on your icon for this to work. And we're going to say a color of RGBA 0.5. So 50% opaque black. Save this back in the browser, and we get this here. Refresh, and it works perfectly fine. Now, one thing missing from the CSS, if I go back to the example, is the focus background color change. It's very slight, but we can see if you look carefully, if I focus on an input field, the background goes a little bit darker. That there, of course, is going to, communicate to your user that they are focused on the input field. Let's apply this using the focus within CSS class. Going back inside here now, on the host, okay, we can say colon host, then use open brackets, colon focus dash within. This means, look, let's look at the host element. When one of the elements within the host has focus, in other words, when the input has focus, you want to then say background and set it to be F1, F1, F1. Save this back in the browser here. Focus on the input field, on a refresh once again, and we can see we get that background color change. It's more obvious because we haven't specified a transition property yet. So if you like this, fair enough, but if you want this to be a subtle change, go back inside here. We can say transition for the background at 0.25 seconds. Save this back in the browser, and there we go. On a refresh, we get that nice smooth transition for the background color. And we are basically done for the majority of this search bar, but there are a few things to talk about, and that is getting the placeholder text custom and the events, okay? Let's focus on the placeholder text first. Basically, I want to be able to say search bar, then data dash placeholder, and I want to customize that message. For example, I can say search products instead. When I do this, I expect this to now say search products. This here is very easy, okay? If we go back inside the component, we can make a new constant at the top here called placeholder equal to this.getAttribute, okay? We can pass in here data dash placeholder. Alternatively, you may also do this.dataset.placeholder. That might be better, but they give you the same result. I'm now going to say or and then say search. What's happening here is, again, connected callback. Once the element is on the document, we're going to grab the placeholder data attribute, okay? Going to get its value. If it's not provided by the user, the developer, then fall back to search as the text. Then simply inject this inside here using $ curly braces. And yeah, it's going to inject that placeholder. Save this back in the browser and we get search products right there. Fantastic. The last thing to mention is the events. So now let's actually try and use this search bar element. If we go back in the index.html, going to give this an ID of search products, just like normal, right? Then inside the main JavaScript file, I'm going to say const search products equal to document.getElement by ID, and pass through here search products. Now, I want to listen to, or I want to know when the user has provided input. I can say search products.addEventListener, then I'm going to say input, just like this, okay? I'm then going to say console.log the event. So also I'm going to capture or grab onto the event object through the parameter here. So I'm going to log that event out. I'll save this, go back in the browser, go into console, and if I was to provide input, we can see the input event has been picked up. This is okay for the most part. I mean, if you know your component is only going to have a single search field or a single input field, then it should be okay. However, this only works because essentially we're adding this event to the parent, right? The host. And it just so happens that, yeah, one of the elements within the host has fired off the input event. And that's why that's getting picked up there, if that makes sense. So it's fine, but it's a little bit loose, right? It's a bit out in the open, okay? What you may want to do instead is you may want to fire custom events off from the component itself. Let's have a look at that now, okay? We're going to say const input underneath the shadow root in HTML is equal to this.shadowroot.query selector. We're going to be grabbing onto the input field. So we're going to use a dot for the class name and of course select that one right there. Then we're going to say input.addEventListener, listen for the input event, okay? Then once the event fires off, so this is like normal code, right? Going to grab onto the event object. When the event fires off, we're just going to say this.dispatch event. we're going to dispatch an event from within the component, okay? Dispatch event, a new custom event, all right? We're going to call this event search-input, all right? We can use the prefix search because we're inside a search bar component, okay? That's not required, but all I'm saying is it would be appropriate because we're inside that component. Now, the event itself will contain a detail property, and we can simply assign this to be the event object itself. So we're just forwarding off the event from here and forwarding it to the custom event. And now, going back in the index.js file, we can change the input to be search-input. Now, I'll save this, go back in the browser. The event, if I type in D, the event turns into a custom event. If I expand this, the detail property gives you the event object itself. You can then combine this with object destructuring in the parameter list to say detail : EV. So open curly bracket, say the detail property is now called EV, which means we get the exact same behavior as before, but this time it is a lot more secure in the sense that we know for sure that this event has come from that input field, right? The one specified here. So yeah, a bit more security with that. You can of course add more events if you would like to, and you may even wish to perform operations on the data before you send it off. Maybe you don't want to forward the entire event object. Maybe you want to trim the string first, or you want to perform validation before you push it up and something like that. So it's up to you guys how you want to handle the events. But yeah, I'd probably stick to just forwarding the event object, but again, up to you guys. So that there's how to build a search bar component using web components. If this video helped you out and you liked it, make sure to drop a like on this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.